So yeah, let's jump into the battle here. It occurred September 27th, 1810. And just to give some background, the Peninsula War at the beginning was kind of going France's way for Napoleon. Junot quickly captured Portugal. The royals of Portugal fled to South America. But then Wellington, the future Duke of Wellington, showed up and kicked Junot out, returned them home to the Convention of Sintra. But then Napoleon himself got involved and invaded Spain, and they chased Sir John Moore out through Corunna in Spain. And then what happens from there? Can you kind of fill us in?
Yeah, so that's where we get to my favorite part of Wellesley coming back and kind of having to assess the situation against Ney and Soult. And he attacks up into Porto, liberates Portugal at the Second Battle of Porto, 12th of May, 1809, and then takes a bit of a risk going back into Spain and fights and closely wins the Battle of Talavera, which the British government ennoble him to Viscount, later Duke of Wellington. So from that point onwards, he's Lord Wellington, and that takes us for most of the summer of 1809, and then we start to push into 1810. And he's got to solidify Portugal. Remember, his main mission he's given is to liberate and support Portugal. But he knows that going on, that Spain's always going to be the battle. So it's quite important to think that he's always got to make sure that Lisbon's safe. And also he's got to think about the wider campaign. And those two things really kind of come to fruition at Bussaco.
Okay. So Napoleon's probably at his wit's end. So he has a few options of who to place in command. Davout is there, Marmont is available, but he chooses Marshal Massena. Do you know why he sent Massena?
Go on. Why did he choose Massena? Out of all of his many marshals.
Well, I mean, the guy was naturally talented beyond. Amazingly talented as a military strategist, but he was also a magnificent looter in the cloth of Soult and some of the others.
Yes.
But he says, Massena, your reputation alone will be enough to finish the business and get the British out of the peninsula. So
he's had a busy career by this point, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's
very experienced commander.
Very experienced commander. They just defeated the Austrians again at Wagram. But he's old. He's 52 years old. But as General Foy says, he looks 60. He lost an eye due to a hunting accident with Napoleon.
This is just after his accident, actually, isn't it? So
right.
he's lost an eye because Napoleon shot him in the face?
Yeah, well.
Or Berthier?
Berthier took the blame, but everyone thinks it was Napoleon who shot Massena in the eye. But he's sent to control this army of Portugal, and he has two men serving under him, Marshal Ney and General Rainier, who probably think they could do just as good a job as Massena, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think there's quite a few points that Ney does wonder why he's second in command on this campaign. But right. Massena, he carries on. He has quite an impressive time in the Peninsular War. But it's very interesting seeing Ney as a second in command to another marshal.
Right. And, like I said, he does have good support staff under him. Massena does. He has an army of about 60,000. And things start off well, right? They quickly win the siege of Ciudad Rodrigo. The Battle of Coa is, they say French victory, but really it was kind of a stalemate, but it wasn't a loss for the French. And then the siege of Almeida ended quickly with that massive explosion inside. So it seems like things start off well for Massena.
Yeah, there's a few things there, isn't there? So Coa is an interesting one where Black Bob Crawford's light division are kind of caught in the surprise and managed to fight a very successful rear guard, a bit of a counterattack, and it's also one of my other favorite battles, probably my favorite small battlefield, but it's very different to Bussaco. It's actually, Coa's beautiful and Bussaco's dramatic. Almeida, this famous kind of lucky or unlucky shot that blows up the magazine and throws tons of gunpowder up and into the air and secondary explosions. So there's some elements of luck. There's some we're on the border, and then as we head towards Bussaco itself, we know that both sides know that there's a major pitched battle coming by this point, it's become a bit inevitable. So we'd had Rodrigo, Almeida had fallen, as you said. So Wellington starts to do some things. He starts to mine some bridges and dig up some bits of roads and blockading them to funnel the troops up towards Bussaco Ridge itself. And
The French troops. Yeah. So, I mean, let's talk about the topography real quick, because I still don't understand why Massena attacked at this point, other than the fact that they're pretty much undefeated. You know, Ciudad Rodrigo, Coa, and Almeida were going so well. But let's talk about the topography, because I don't understand why you would assault a ridge that high and that long.
No, I mean, so Bussaco Ridge is about 10 miles, 16 kilometers long. I think it's over 500 meters, like 1,800 feet high. It's tall, and it's not a gentle climb in any way, shape, or form. It is steep. It is like a knife ridge back at certain points. And I can't remember if I said this in the last recording or not, but my little Portuguese hire car going up there was in first gear, really struggling, and I was like changing gear around the corners, like a scene out of the Italian Job original.
Right.
Original.
The original.
Yeah, and it really was steep to drive up there. Nowadays, it was quite heavily wooded. It wasn't wooded then; it was quite exposed, but it's a hell of a position. You know, you can see for miles and miles. So Wellington's troops would have had really good fair warning about anyone coming. You know, probably like a good day of march. You know, troops marching create a lot of dust with wagons and boots and things getting thrown up, as well as, you know, it's not quiet. Horses, the accoutrements onto horses jangle and people laugh, swear, music, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then just think, marching up a 500-meter plus ridge is very hard going. Never mind the fact that this is going to be in a battle, so there's going to be incoming fire on you.
Right, and it's not like it's your artillery or cavalry can support you. It's all on the infantry.
This is massively going to be on the infantry. I think there's points of it that the French artillery could actually not reach the peak because it's actually too steep. To, you know, if they can go onto the ridge at the bottom, but actually they need to get onto the base of that ridge in order to elevate their guns.
Right.
So that just, it is a good, 40 kind of degree angle at certain points. Stunning, absolutely stunning. And part of that is because there was a convent, a religious order of monks there in the center of the ridge pretty much. And that's now Bussaco Palace, which is now a hotel.
And I was reading Charles Oman and Marbot's notes, and one of the other features of Bussaco is once you get up to the ridge, there's this flat top area where you can move troops around to any hot spots that pop up. So let's imagine a 9-mile long line of British redcoats and Portuguese troops. Of the 50,000 troops that Wellington had, half of them were Portuguese. But just imagine this long line, but also imagine there's a flat top at the top where they could move troops to any troubled areas, correct?
Yeah, it's got a nice plateau to it. So it's really in weight of the Anglo-Portuguese, forces, the British and Portuguese.
Yep.
Because they've had that climb, admittedly, they've had to do it as well. But now they're rested in nice surroundings and they can move up and down, roughly north and south position, in relative ease because it's flat up there. Anyone coming towards them, they can move around and get to them far quicker.
Right. And let's talk about Wellington's favorite thing to use in battle, which is reverse slope. So the French probably have 60,000 troops. They're going against 50,000 troops, but they can't see them all, right? They can't tell how many are up there.
Yeah, they're going to have no idea at this position. It's not even the full-blown reverse slope that we talk about for many battles, especially Waterloo, because Wellington doesn't need to hide his troops on the full reverse slope, because by being at just on the plateau, they're going to be invisible to troops on the ground at eye height.
Right.
So he's kind of doing a reverse slope by just being on the ridge. The French guns, apart from some howitzers and some bits, can't get to him initially, and he can move troops. And the whole point of the reverse slope is it's kind of shunned by, especially, funny enough, people who seem to love Napoleon Bonaparte. because it's thought as being a bit derivative. It's easy. Well, actually, it's quite bold because you're not being able to bring your guns and your troops to bear at the beginning, but it allows that degree of movement. You can move people around without them hopefully being in the main line of fire and not getting all the casualties. And here he's got some untested troops. He's got some Portuguese, which is really important that the British and the Portuguese are fighting alongside each other as both regular and militia Portuguese, actually.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up. This is the first real test for the reconstituted Portuguese army. I know they've been working with Marshal Beresford, correct, to get kind of retrained and ready, I guess, prepared for battle.
Yeah, Beresford, who's one of Wellington's close generals, he gets put as marshal of the Portuguese forces after, or basically, the Portuguese forces, most of the army had been conscripted into the French army. They form the Portuguese Legion, and they get marched out. Now, remember, the first invasion of Portugal kind of goes off without a shot. So Napoleon orders that he'll take the Portuguese army. A few desert before it starts, so they get formed into a legion of mixed of infantry, cavalry, and artillery, and they start to march back to France because they don't want to deploy them in Portugal because that's just senseless. But I've got a soft spot for the Portuguese. Today they're very friendly people, but back then they fought very hard for the liberation of their country. And I'm a bit proud always to say that half of those troops deserted before they got to the Pyrenees.
Right.
And they pretty much all headed back to Portugal, and most of them then rejoined Beresford's force of Portuguese army. A few joined as partisans, as guerrillas. I imagine a few went home. Yes, of course. But then I always feel very sorry for the Portuguese who stayed in the Legion, and because they ended up as far as Moscow.
Right.
And that's a long way from home.
That is. But getting back to our battle here at Bussaco, the strategy, I think Massena again kind of screwed up here, not to play Monday morning quarterback, but it was a two-pronged attack, one by Rainier's Second Corps, and then I think like an hour later it was the Sixth Corps of Ney, Marshal Ney. Do you kind of want to talk about how that started?
Yeah, so they go in very early. They've marched, they've been spotted, so the troops on top of the ridge know they're coming. And they go up against British and, quite conveniently for our background here, British and Portuguese troops attack them back in line. And the French come on in their classic column. So it's column versus line here. And then they try to deploy out as the Allies bring in huge amount of musketry. So it's 2 ranks deep. And this is where they bring in more troops to the side. There's more British troops. So you've got quite a lot of Portuguese holding the centre, 2 battalions of Portuguese, and British troops coming on the side of those columns. Now, the columns work because they allow the famous French Elan, the spirits, marching up and pushing them on.
Right.
And the 88th are one of the battalions that come in on the side, and those are the Connaught Rangers, who actually include a lot of Gaelic-speaking Irishmen who speak, English badly or as a second language, some of them.
Right.
And they charge in bayonets into it's very rocky coming up. And there's a fantastic account by Ensign William Grattan, where he talks about charging through the smoke of the musket, sword drawn, and coming face to face with the French. And it just, this is always one of the ones, if I could say, if you can get hold of Grattan, I think it's on like Kindle for like £1 sterling or $1.
Right.
It's quite a good book if you can get hold of it. I think there's like the modern print of it's only like £4 or £5.
Okay.
Well worth it, and it reads better than a Bernard Cornwell Sharp, I'm afraid to say. It does. There's certain points he really does talk about the hand-to-hand fighting, and it's from a guy who's there. He actually talks about, he thinks that some of the troops in front of him might be from the Irish Legion, and these are Irishmen who are fighting for the French.
Yeah.
Mostly emigres, second generation, but some of them actually left Ireland to fight against Britain. Yeah. Turns out he didn't, because he does admit he didn't see any of the Irish Legion there. And there's work being done and proving that the Irish Legion was at a different point of the battlefield. But it's that kind of closeness of almost Irish on Irish here makes that's quite interesting. And Wellington witnesses this charge go in with bayonets into the column. I think you've got the quote there, have you?
Yeah, I do. Quote, "I have never witnessed a more gallant charge," end quote. And that just speaks to me, like, Wellington had seen a lot by that point in India and, a lot of places, and he'd never seen a better one than that.
Yeah, I think that's his kind of classic understatement of Wellington. Just, I've never witnessed a more gallant charge. Thank you.
Right.
Carry on. He's not cheering. That's not his style, and handing out loads of honors. So yeah, that was the best I've seen. Well done. That's it.
Yeah, and this is an onslaught, but the French do gain a foothold. General Foy, he gets in there, and they're holding a spot there, but then it's just a tremendous amount of firepower being unleashed on Rainier's corps. And I was reading Charles Hamon, and it said, usually in engagements in the peninsula, the French suffered one officer casualty for every 22 men. But in this battle, it was one officer casualty for every 15 men, because I think the officers were at the front trying to get their men up the hill and into the battle.
Yeah, and they must have been, I'm trying to think of those long leg steps that you need to get up a long slope, and they must have been doing that, sword drawn.
Yep.
Cheering them on, come on, after me, my, mes enfants. And they're going to get wounded, and General Foy gets wounded in this as well.
Yeah,
I know you just finished your podcast on him. I was listening to.
Yep.
Another really interesting character, and he's there leading his troops.
Indeed.
Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere, and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify.
Indeed. And then, for whatever reason, Ney's attack was supposed to be an hour later once he saw that Rainier's troops were at the top of the hill. So maybe they assumed that the British would funnel troops over to Rainier's attack, and then Ney's attack would be left unguarded. But that wasn't the case, was it?
No, I think he's made this assumption. He's going on, and then as they reach the top of the crest, he comes against the British light infantry, the 43rd and the 52nd Oxfordshire Light Infantry.
Correct.
And these are part of Black Bob Crawford's famous light division. So these are your men who are very good at skirmishing. Actually, here they're kind of in line, and they kind of stand up out of this rocky crest, fire in volleys, and then charge, follow it in with bayonets. And you can imagine here, actually, it's going to be quite instantaneous. You've marched all the way up this crest. You might, if you're lucky, have seen your comrades fighting, but if not, you're just going to be in the middle of a column, and all you get is something out of the rock, hit up some troops, crashing volleys. It's going to be loud, people around you dying, and then you just see red coats coming towards you with bayonets, and they've got then the impetus of running down a slope towards you as well. So you're going to be physically knocked back as well.
Right. It must be scary as heck. And let's say, like you said, you're in a column, but you actually make it to the crest, and then you see, my God, there's 50,000 troops up here. What are we doing? So it must have been terrifying. And then eventually the French forces are swept off the ridge. Several of their generals are wounded. One is killed, Graindorge. So I know they kind of run back down the hill, and that's kind of where the battle ends up.
Yeah, I mean, give them their credit in that they do get onto the ridge, especially the Second Corps attack, as we say. I think they rout a unit of Portuguese militia.
Yep.
But I mean, and that in itself, I think, is an incredible feat, just getting up that ridge under the fire. And by this point, when they start to rout, I think there's quite a lot of prisoners captured in this engagement as well, and especially some ranking brigade level commanders of the French are kind of captured as they're trying to rally men around them who are fleeing. It means that they're more static, and the Allies can get in amongst them and capture them. I think it's about 400 captured.
Yeah. It's the French suffered 522 dead, 3,600 wounded, and about 400 captured. The Allies only 200 dead, 1,000 wounded, and about 51 missing. So the French suffered about 3 times what the British and Portuguese suffered.
Yes, and just a quick word on missing. Sometimes that is dead. We don't know where they've gone. Sometimes it's administrative error, but more often than not, it's somebody who's taken their chance to desert in the confusion. So
Okay.
it could be one of a few things, but that's often what missing comes into. But yeah, you can see there's quite a discrepancy in the dead and wounded levels, and British aren't recording any casualties. And one of my stand-up ones from this, I remember from Oman, is he lists both the Portuguese and the British having suffered exactly the same number of casualties.
Yeah.
I think it was 626. So that shows, just how much here the Beresford's Portuguese and Wellington's British are fighting alongside each other in this battle, and it's a really old alliance, the Anglo-Portuguese alliance. It goes back to early medieval era and still goes on today, despite recent political situations. So I think it's a really solidifying point where these men had stood up, and there's a few accounts afterwards as well of the British saying, "Yeah, the Portuguese weren't bad," which is a strong British praise to say, "Yeah, that's okay."
Well, on the other side, and you mentioned this before, I'd like to point out, I mean, the chances of success were slim. How heavy are the packs and the muskets that the French troops are carrying up this giant hill?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend man on man, but I always say it's roughly 40 to 50 kilos, depending on if they've still got their spares of clothes and how much food, and especially for the French, how much loot they're carrying. So, and people would carry, additional things because they wanted to, or additional things because they've stolen it. So,
Right.
it will vary, but actually, if you take off like modern body armor and helmets, it's quite equatable to what a soldier would carry today in their Bergen, in their backpack. Carry a spare pair of shoes, you carry something to sleep in, you carry some food, you carry a spare shirt.
Yeah, but
So
imagine falling
that
down
doesn't change.
a hill while people are shooting at you.
Yeah, and they don't. The soldiers of the time very rarely tend to drop those bags because you don't have the logistics chain to support you. So they tend to fight with their packs on.
Okay. Well, Massena obviously realizes this is a bad idea, and he kind of reorganizes his troops at the base of the hill, but he kind of skillfully outflanks Wellington the next day, correct?
Yeah, and I think actually this is one that Ney leads on and says, "Let's go round." So Wellington finishes the day still on the ridge. There's a little bit of rear guard skirmishing at the end of the day and the next day, but Massena, I do believe it was led by Ney, kind of goes around the north.
Yeah, I think they found some Portuguese citizen or resident told him about a path around it, and Ney and his troops found it and kind of went from there and took Coimbra shortly after.
Yeah, and they keep going. And actually, you mentioned Coimbra, which is a beautiful university city, one of the oldest libraries in Europe. And I know they drop all their sick and wounded in Coimbra, and then actually as they march on, the Portuguese get amongst them. I think there's some pretty horrible scenes actually.
Yeah.
But they march on, and Wellington knows that they're marching round. He sees this. He's still on the ridge, so he can witness it happen, and he's not phased by it. And he picks his army up in good order. This isn't like a retreat to Corunna.
Right.
They turn around, march in disciplined lines back to Lisbon, and he's pretty non-phased by this, isn't he?
Yeah, and he's got a surprise waiting for Massena, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. He's got the lines of Torres Vedras, which are three principal lines, a primary, secondary, and then there's a outer works around Lisbon of about 150 defensive positions that, wherever possible, they interlock. They use natural ravines and features. They actually have chain links across the mighty rivers, and even some Royal Navy gunboats on the rivers. So it's impassable because Lisbon's actually on a bit of a peninsula of itself, and it funnels the Massena's troops down. And though some attempts are made against the first line, the primary line, they're never breached.
Yep.
And they are very strong defensive positions. It was Wellington's idea, and he's handed it over to Royal Engineers Colonel Fletcher and Richard Fletcher with his Portuguese laborers who design and build, and each, what I find really strange but quite impressive is every single one of these forts is unique. They don't take a design and copy and paste it across. They build a different fort at every position.
Right. And, I think Wellington reached the lines of Torres Vedras by October 10th. So basically 2 weeks after the battle. And I know Massena has received a lot of flack for not doing more to. Now he didn't know about the lines of Torres Vedras, nor did Napoleon. So, he was kind of probably licking his wounds at Coimbra. He couldn't retreat because he's Massena. He's not going to retreat anywhere. And he probably didn't want to attack the British again after receiving that bloody nose. So I really can't fault him for kind of reorganizing Coimbra, but I think just leaving your wounded there while you went on to the lines was probably a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in what your assessment would be. His big problem he's now going to have is by being outside in what's now the autumn of Torres Vedras, is Wellington and the local troops have brought as much food inside the lines as possible to survive the winter. So it's basically scorched earth tactics.
Right.
Not all of the Portuguese abandon their homes, but also he takes a lot of the Portuguese inside. And worthy of note, because this doesn't get mentioned all the time, is actually the food primarily goes to the fighting men. So there is actually a high element of starvation within the Portuguese that winter.
Right.
But that's nothing like Massena's men suffer. They're going out, they're trying to find fodder for the horses and food for themselves. They have clashes with guerrillas. This is the height of if a man goes off by himself to find his own food and he comes across a local, the local will try to kill him. Better than not. This is where it gets very nasty.
Yeah, I mean, by the time he finally leaves, he retreats into Spain in 1811. He's lost 25,000 men from sickness or starvation. So yeah, it's pretty bad out there.
Yeah, that's 25,000 out of 60,000. So there's a really, really bad odds, and it's mostly through exposure in the winter because it does, can snow in Portugal in the winter.
Yep.
And it gets cold and exposure, and some of the houses and barns are being torn down, burned down by the Portuguese and the British to give them that exposure to the French. But also there's so little food, and they're about as far as they can be from their own supply lines because they're right in the west of the country. So it's it kind of highlights the brutality of the warfare. But then the lines of Torres Vedras, just the other side of it, is they are pretty much an engineering masterpiece. They've got interlocking arcs, they've got observation positions, and they've actually got a semaphore type system as well that uses balls and flags. It's like big inflatable balls that goes up and down, so they can send quite complicated messages. So it's a really high tech area as well. If anyone gets a chance to visit them, all the different, like I say, all the forts are different, so they make for a really interesting visit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about the legacy of Bussaco real quick. I'll speak to the Portuguese part. I think it was a major morale boost for them. When Napoleon invaded in 1807, they barely put up a fight, which, basically scared the royal family off to South America. But this battle was the first time they kind of were really organized. They had the British supporting them, and they fought toe-to-toe with, the best troops in Europe, the French, and performed quite well, don't you think?
Yeah, I think we should never underestimate what the Portuguese contribution is to the Peninsular War. So here is it's not their first time fighting. We do see them from about the 1809 campaign.
Right.
But it's their first time in a pitched battle side to side with the British. Before, it's been quite a lot of flanking maneuvers. Always like to shout out to the little ones that we don't talk about very often. So the Loyalist Italian Legion, who are like an irregular force, have been out in the mountains for the whole time with men like John Trant and Robert Wilson, British officers doing pretty strange things in the hills, holding up the French.
Right.
And they, very much like kind of ranger tactics, very impressive.
Yeah.
But this is them, regular line infantry fighting alongside British regular line infantry against French regular line infantry. So there's a lot of comparisons can be made. And there's one unit of Portuguese militia that break when the two corps get onto the ridge. But then they are the militia, they're not as well trained. They're there for the duration of the war or short time in campaign. But the Portuguese line troops do very well. And like I say, that kind of begrudging respect from the British counterparts actually does, again, a bit like Wellington's understatement, actually means high praise. And that then means that Wellington slowly gets more and more faith in the Portuguese, which means that his numbers are higher. He's actually counted them as a full unit.
Yeah.
And it also then kudos to Beresford for training up an army largely from scratch.
Yeah. On the British side, I only saw one criticism, but it was why Wellington didn't march down the hill and attack Massena the next day. And I think it can be said when Wellington was asked, which marshal was the best, it was Massena. That was who he didn't take chances against. And he didn't need to. He could retire, like you said, leisurely, not in a rush manner, behind the lines of Torres Vedras, regroup and refit, and be ready to fight again. So I don't think that criticism of Wellington is valid.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it could be Wellington. He never gets that complete victory, does he? But
Mm-hmm.
and we see that time and time again. But yeah, he doesn't need to. He's actually on the back foot in this battle. As we said earlier, he's lost Ciudad Rodrigo and Almeida and a combat on the Coa. So he's on the back foot. And what he's looking to do then is stem the French invasion, and then move back. And he knows, it's September, autumn and winter are coming. I've got the lines of Torres Vedras. They're finished. And we can test them out. And he has relative faith then in those lines. And let's face it, it's quite mountainous terrain there as well. So he can, if worst case scenarios, he can fight a similar battle again. It'll be more risky because it's closer to the capital, but he can fight that again. But there are actually troops in the capital, British and Portuguese, there to bolster his numbers. So he can play, he can kind of do that risk-benefit analysis that officers need to do, as well as, in a modern business place, that you kind of weigh up your risks. And he goes, okay, yeah, we can move back in order. Whereas if he goes on the attack and Massena manages to do a counterattack, actually, then he's off his mountainous ridge. Bussaco was a good place, hence he stayed there the next night as well.
Right.
So, it's an interesting one, but my takeaway from Bussaco is, yes, as well as counterattacks and bayonet charges and Portuguese bravery and fantastic engineering in the background, this dramatic scenery. If you get a chance to visit somewhere, as far as different battlefields go, Bussaco is about the one that you think it's very different to most Napoleonic battles that happen to be big open flat fields.
Right.
This is not that.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like unlike any other battlefield you'll find. And it sounds really intriguing. But I appreciate that overview, Marcus. That was very impressive. And I think it's a battle that, there's bigger battles in the Peninsula War, obviously, Fuentes de Enoro and Salamanca, but I think this one's very intriguing, don't you?
Yeah, I really like Bussaco because it is that test bed of the Anglo-Portuguese troops and alliance, and having Massena and Ney against Wellington here,
Right.
but also the stunning scenery. It's got a cute little museum. Do go and visit as well if you get that chance. You'll need to get a hire car up there, probably a bigger one than the one I hired. But it's stunning. Or I'll put some photos up, I'm sure, for this for when the podcast goes out. But it's stunning. It's dramatic. I had a lot of fun running up and down the slopes and tiring myself out. And it's a really good one. From my only one always is, I kind of wonder why Massena didn't bypass the whole situation. I probably know the answer. He doesn't want to be attacked in the rear, but I wouldn't want to be stood at the bottom of Bussaco Ridge and go, whether I was an officer on a horse or a man with a pack, it's going to be hard going.
Yeah, and I thought about that. Like, maybe if he would have tried just a single attack instead of a two-prong, like the system that Napoleon used when he invaded Spain, he basically made a sledgehammer at Tudela and then split that sledgehammer into parts to wrap around the Spanish army. But again, that was more on flat fields. I don't know going uphill what would have worked. So, yeah, you make a good point. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what Massena was thinking either.
No, it's very sometimes easy to have the benefit of hindsight and safe living and guess them, but that's part of the fun of it, I guess, as well. But it certainly doesn't seem like an option that had much benefit. I think the odds were stacked against him from the offset. And I think the French did very well, especially 2 corps to get onto the ridge itself.
Yeah, indeed.
They did very well for that.
Indeed. Well, thank you, my friend. Another good episode as always. And yeah, let's reconvene in October. I'm sure we have more battles coming up.
I'm sure they do, and I always enjoy these overview styles. I hope other people do. So let us know what they think and what else we can do.
Sounds good. Thank you, Marcus.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone.